Hello everyone and welcome back to another video in the tutorial series of how to use Blender for 3D modeling. In this video, we will work together to create a very simplified representation of the Bixby Creek Bridge in California. So, first step, we will put in a reference image. We only use one reference image for this time because we are not aiming for a very realistic rendition. Really, we're only looking to replicate its general shape without adding in detailed features, very fine construction details. We're not going to have very realistic, on-point textures. So let's go to the front view by pressing number pad 1, Shift A to add, and let's go to image, reference image, and you should have a pop-up window allowing you to find your reference image file. Before we keep working on it, there are several options that we can set. We can click on the reference image, go to Object Data Properties, and we can turn on opacity. This affects how transparent the reference image is, and I think 0.5 works fine. And secondly, you will also want to have depth turned to front, set to front. The difference is that, let's say we add a cube, and if the depth is set to default, notice how the cube is actually blocking the reference image. If we set it to front, then we will always be able to see the reference image. Then we want to use this part to help us in our modeling process. The third option that we can have is the only axis aligned checkbox. If we have it on, then we will only be able to see the reference image when we are at the front view. Notice how all the other viewpoints, all the other perspective angles, we won't be able to see the reference image. Personally speaking, I do make use of this setting, although sometimes towards the end of the modeling process, I will have this turned off just to double check on the model and cross check it with the reference images to make sure everything goes according to plan. But for now, let's keep this turned on and move to front view, and let's start modeling. Notice how we only have one reference image for this time. A lot of times, especially if you want to really replicate a more realistic model, you will want multiple reference images from multiple viewpoints. However, what we really want to do for this exercise is just this structure. So I think one reference image is enough, is sufficient, and we will just eyeball the other dimensions, especially the width of the bridge later on. So let's first move this object to around in the middle and scale it down along the z-axis till it's very, very thin. Something like this. And I do notice the bridge itself is not completely horizontally flat, as you can tell from the reference image, but let's, for simplicity's sake, say that it's rather flat for now. And we'll create the pillars later on, but first let us create this curved structure. Now, there are a lot of ways, of course, to create this curved structure, but I want to show you the very efficient way that does not necessarily gives you the best results. Let's, instead of having a cube, let's start with a plane and move the plane to around here. Let's say somewhere here. Now, let's slightly switch our viewpoint and go into edit mode and add one loop cut down the middle. If you forgot about loop cuts, you go Control R, hover around the edges, left click once, and when it allows you to choose where to put the loop cut, just right click to cancel. Now, with the loop selected, let's move the loop vertically upwards by pressing Ctrl G, somewhere here, and let's move the two ends of this plane, so this and this. We can select this by holding down Shift and select both of them, or if you are just in the front view, you can have X-ray mode toggled on. Shortcut key is alternate Z, or just go to the top right hand corner and then box select this end to select this, or if you're in vertex mode, box select, and you should have these selected. And let's scale them along the X direction. Let me select it again. Scale them along the X direction to somewhere here. You don't have to be precisely on point. Somewhere here should be fine. And now let's select the top edge again and bevel it. So Control B for bevel. And we can scroll up and down for more vertices, for more segments. So I think for our purposes, let's have, say, 9 segments maybe. And you'll want to move them slightly about where we're almost even, like here. And now we can select everything and let's scale it bigger across the horizontal, along the horizontal axis. So scale it up by Z, sorry. So S and Z. And we might want to scale this down a little bit and move it slightly upwards to fit in the curvature. You might want to adjust it by scaling it across the X direction as well, just slightly, and moving them. So we kind of have a curved plane. Notice that this is still a plane, and the reason why I have a plane instead of a cube is that this method doesn't really work with a cube. In a cube, if you add bevels across this whole loop that is bent, you will have overlapping geometries very easily. Whereas if we're having a plane, we have this structure. All we need to do is to shape it roughly how we want it to be shaped. And now we can have everything selected. Press E to extrude directly upwards. And we now have a curved plane. And of course, we can shade smooth so that this looks rather smooth, like this. I think we might want to scale it up along the X direction a little bit more, just a little bit, like this. Now again, we're not aiming for like a detailed replication, so you don't have to follow the reference image 100%. And now let's make the pillars. Now I know it really is more detailed than this. You can see there are actually 2 pillars with certain connections in between. But for our purposes, let's just make it so that it's one flat piece of wood of pillar supporting the arch. What I mean is to have a cube. Let's move it somewhere here. Scale it down to about the width. And scale it larger along the Z direction. So here. And take this piece as a cube, like as the pillar. We'll want to scale it bigger because this really couldn't support, and these are a lot too wide. Let's first of all make this less wide, and so select both of them, S and Y, to make it reasonably thin, like this. Next, let's have this scale it along the Y direction to make it slightly wider as well. And it's probably a little bit too thick, so it's S and X to scale it to be a little bit shorter, like thinner. And then we can duplicate this to the other side, like this here. And I notice, again, this piece might need to be scaled wider a little bit more. So like this here. Just some adjusting of its sizes. Again, we've done a lot of scaling operations in object mode. And you'll notice this, say for example, this is now only at 0.027 here, and we are at like different scales. So let's press A and then select everything, Control A to go to the apply menu and apply rotation and scale. Oops. Oh, I should not select the object here. Let's hide this. Select everything, apply rotation and scale, so that all of these objects are scaled at 1. Let's have the reference image come out again. So let's first say that we want to move these cubes, the two pillars, and place it directly on the bridge. What we can do is we can go to the snapping tool, have it on face select, have both of these pillars selected, move vertically upwards, so move along the Z axis, G and then Z, and then hover our mouse near the underside of the flat plane so that they now match together. And if we go back to the reference image, notice how both of these kind of have their feet short. What we can do is, again, we can select both of them, go to edit mode, and have the bottom faces selected, and then just move them vertically downwards, say here. We kind of have the beginning representation of the bridge. Now, of course, the bridge is not that simplified. There are still a lot of the other pillars needed here. But for now, let's fill up these middle pillars and call it a day. Of course, a bridge is not that simple, but the more details you want to put in, the more time and research and effort that goes into making this model. And as beginners, let's first focus on replicating this overall shape, and then afterwards think about adding new finer details and features into the 3D model. So let's take these as very thin pieces of wood, of like cubes, being placed along the slope, along this curved structure to support the bridge. So what we can do is to, again, have cubes scaled down, moved to its appropriate places, and scaled to be very thin. And know this is meant to be two pillars, one on each side, and then interconnected in the middle. But let's simplify it to just be one flat plane. And what we want to do is to scale it. Well, first of all, let's move it up so that it's roughly at the same, or so it's touching the bottom side. And now let's go into edit mode and again move this bottom face downwards. So B, Z to around here. Notice how this curvature, we might want to make it a little bit thicker so that this is easier and this won't overlap as much. Or what we can do is to have this face selected, press R and Y so that it's rotating along here. But notice how if we do this, only this face is going to be rotated and this is going to look slightly thinner. So let's undo it. There are multiple ways of doing this, of course. And let's make this slightly wider so let's select the top faces. And vertically move it upwards a little bit more. Maybe move the entire structure slightly downwards. Now here, let's move this face slightly downwards as well. We can duplicate this structure to the other side. So let's duplicate, Shift D to duplicate Y. Oops. Nope. Is in fact X to move it across. Let's have stepping turn off. Here. We can actually duplicate this and move this across to almost all of these. Just for simplicity's sake. There are, of course, easier ways to do this with modifiers, and we will talk about modifiers later on. And now these needs to be adjusted its length. So we do this, move the face upwards, and rinse and repeat. Go to edit mode, bottom face, G to move, Z to move upwards. Again here, edit mode, GZ, edit mode, GZ, edit mode, GZ, and oops, make sure you only select the face, G, Z, go up, G, edit mode, just the face, G, Z, go up. Tab to go back to object mode, select another object, rinse and repeat. And this is actually slightly outside of it, so let's move it downwards a little bit more. And let's notice how this is slightly protruding, like this. Let's have these all of these slightly thinner. That's S and Y. So all of these are slightly thinner. And now we have a very, very rough replication of the Bixby Creek Bridge. And now what's left is for us to add in some colors. Now, before we do that, I'd like to do a little bit easier of tidying up. So let's right click and add a new collection. Let's call it reference image, or just ref. And now pull the reference image downwards. And I'll change this collection's name to bridge. So now I can hide and hide the entire bridge. And I can hide and hide the reference image based on its collection. Now the bridge itself, there's not a whole lot of color information built in here. Let's have the reference image a lot brighter. So this is kind of shadowy, so it's a lot darker, but you can imagine like a gray-ish kind of wood. So let's create a material. Go to material properties, new, to select a new material. And let's have a kind of, let's have it slightly dark brown, very, very, very slight brown. This, let's call this dark gray, dark gray. Personally, I like the color brown, so I tend to have I think a little brownish color here. Darkish brown would work. Let's have it rough, very, very rough. It's meant to be either wood or cement anyways. And let's go to preview. This is maybe a little bit too brown, actually. Let's have one. Maybe just really dark brown is enough. And I can have all of these selected. Maybe just this one, hide it. Press H to hide, Alt and H to unhide everything. Let's just select these and go to Object, Link, and Link Materials to apply all these same materials to everything. Or if you want to go one by one, you can just select this, go to the materials properties, and browse material, and have the same material built tied in. But let's have, I think this is meant to be a little bit more metallic. Oops. So let's have everything selected. Go to Object, Link Materials to have everything in the same material. There are just one material currently existing, that is these. Now alternate H to unhide everything. And let's say this is a little bit more metallic. Let's brown, let's gray, a little bit more metallic. This. And this top plane is meant to be probably cement with roads built in. So let's keep it like this. Kind of similar properties with dark brown, dark gray, but a little lighter. A little lighter. Again, rough. And let's see. So this is what it is. And let's go to rendered view. It is in a purple texture because my environment lighting is not set up. Let me quickly set that up. So it kind of looks like this. And for you, you might not have this set up because I have an environment lighting that is set up. And if you don't have these, say you have this is on, and you should have this just being pitch black. And to be able to look at the colors, we can Shift A, just add some light, for example like this. We can change the light settings, of course. Maybe a little bit too powerful. And this is kind of the bridge that we just created. And of course, this is not exactly what the bridge looks like. In real life, it looks a lot more gorgeous, and we don't really have a lot of information based on the just the reference image. Again, this is probably one of those instances where we want to have only access assigned turned off. And there's a lot more details that we can add into it. But for now, as our first modeling exercise with reference images, I think this is a good place to end. In the future, we'll talk a lot more about particular things. For example, notice how we have to duplicate all of these one by one and then changing them one by one. There are faster ways of doing things. This bending structure, notice this is not really a very, very smooth curve because it's essentially bent and then dragged up. There are better ways of achieving this effect. And also, we are grossly neglecting a lot of the textures and fine details, all of which it'll take a lot more time to build in. So for now, let's say this is fine. And the final thing I want to talk about is about if you need to export things. You can go to File, go to Export, and select the format that you want to select. If you are doing 3D printing, STL is probably the file format that you're looking for. But otherwise, if you want to retain texture information, you probably want to use either FBX or OBJ files. And feel free to try out different settings. And this is basically it. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit more about shading, such as the default that I set up, the environment lighting that I set up, some of the object-related settings, these various different nodes, as well as some additional nodes, say for example, image textures that we can use so that we can have a full image of what the thing looked like, the patterns and details, instead of having one fixed color. So until the next video, I hope you enjoy this tutorial series, and this is your second model in Blender.